Standing there frozen, I watched my husband raise his glass and say, "This dance is for the woman I've loved for 10 years, and he wasn't talking about me." The room cheered. I smiled, but inside something shattered, because the woman he meant showed up in my house last week, wearing his sweatshirt, acting like she belonged. That was the moment I knew. This story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about the trap I was finally ready to close. Before we dive into this story, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from, your city, your country, wherever you are in the world. And please hit that like button for me right now and subscribe to my channel. We're building a community of people who refuse to be silenced, who know that dignity has no expiration date. Now back to my story. My name is Darla. I'm 52 years old, and I've spent the last decade of my life married to a man who never actually chose me. Let me take you back to where it all started, to the moment I should have known, the moment I ignored every screaming instinct in my body because I wanted so desperately to believe in something real. It was my wedding day, 10 years ago. I was 42, standing in a room full of people who kept telling me how lucky I was, how Franklin was such a catch, how we looked so perfect together. The reception was beautiful, everything I'd dreamed of, white roses everywhere, candles flickering on every table, music floating through the air like a promise. Then Franklin stood up to make a toast. He was handsome in his tuxedo, confident, charming the way he always was in front of a crowd. He raised his glass and the room went quiet. Everyone was smiling, waiting for him to say something romantic, something that would make all the women cry and all the men nod approvingly. And he delivered. "This dance," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "is for the woman I've loved for 10 years. The room erupted in applause. People were cheering, whistling. Some of the women were already dabbing at their eyes. It was perfect. It was exactly what everyone wanted to hear. But here's the thing, and I need you to understand this because it's important. When he said those words, Franklin didn't look at me. His eyes went somewhere else, somewhere distant, like he was looking at a memory instead of his brand new wife standing right in front of him. I felt it, that tiny fracture. That hairline crack that starts so small you can convince yourself it's nothing, just your imagination, just wedding day jitters, just the stress of planning this whole event making you see things that aren't there. So, I did what I had learned to do so well over the years. I smiled. I took his hand. We danced. And I buried that feeling so deep I almost convinced myself it never happened. Almost. You want to know who I was back then? You need to understand the woman I had built myself into, because it explains everything that came after. I was the dependable one, the one who held things together, the one who believed that loyalty and patience could fix anything, could smooth over any rough patch, could turn a good relationship into a great one if you just tried hard enough. I'd spent my whole life being that woman, at work, with my family, with my friends. I was the glue, the steady hand, the one who never complained, never caused drama, never asked for too much. And Franklin? Well, Franklin was charming, successful, the kind of man who made you feel special when he paid attention to you, and a little lost when he didn't. He was a financial consultant, always busy, always taking calls, always with meetings that ran late and business trips that seemed to pop up at the last minute. But he was affectionate when we were together, thoughtful, in that casual way that made you feel cared for without being overwhelming. We had a comfortable life, a nice house, in a quiet neighborhood, dinner parties with couples who seemed just like us, Sunday morning coffee in bed, the kind of marriage that looked perfect from the outside. But there were patterns. Little things I told myself didn't matter. The way he'd step into another room to take certain phone calls, the nights he'd come home distracted, distant, like his mind was still somewhere else. The business trips that felt too frequent, too last minute, too vague when I asked for details. I'd learned not to ask too many questions, not because he told me not to, but because asking felt like I was being paranoid, jealous, the kind of woman I'd always promised myself I wouldn't be. So I didn't ask. I smiled. I trusted. I chose loyalty over doubt. And for 10 years, I convinced myself that was strength. 3 months ago, everything changed. I was looking for our tax documents because our accountant needed them by the end of the week. Franklin had mentioned they were in his briefcase. The leather one he only used for important client meetings. I wasn't snooping. I need you to understand that. I wasn't looking for anything except tax forms and bank statements. But when I opened that briefcase, a photograph fell out from between 2 folders. It was old, the kind of photo that had that slightly faded quality of pictures from the late 90s, and it showed Franklin, maybe 15 years younger, standing with his arm around a woman I'd never seen before. They were at the beach, sunset behind them, both of them laughing at something. And the way he was looking at her, God, the way he was looking at her was something I'd never seen directed at me. Not even on our wedding day. I turned the photo over. Written on the back in faded blue ink were 2 words and a date. Lenora, summer 98. My hand started shaking before my brain even fully processed what I was looking at. Summer 1998. I did the math quickly, frantically. That was the summer before Franklin and I got serious, before we moved in together, before we started talking about marriage. Or at least, that's what I had always believed. But this photo, the way they were standing, the intimacy in their body language, this wasn't some casual friend. This was someone who mattered, and I had never heard her name before. I stood there in our home office holding that photograph, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger yet, not even hurt really, just this cold, clarifying realization that I had been living in a story I didn't fully understand, that there were chapters of Franklin's life he'd kept hidden from me, that maybe, just maybe, the man I'd married wasn't who I thought he was. I put the photo back exactly where I found it. I closed the briefcase. I went back to my day. But something had changed. I started paying attention. The first week after finding the photo, nothing seemed different. Franklin was Franklin, busy, distracted, but pleasant enough when we were together. We had dinner, watched television, went through our normal routines. But I was watching him now with different eyes, noticing things I'd trained myself to overlook. The way he checked his phone constantly, even during conversations. The way he'd suddenly announce he needed to run an errand without explaining what it was. The way he'd come home from work and go straight to shower before even saying hello. Then, exactly 8 days after I found the photo, Franklin mentioned a name at dinner. We were eating pasta, something simple I'd thrown together after work, and he was scrolling through his phone with one hand, fork in the other, only half paying attention to the meal, or to me. Then he said, almost casually, "An old friend from college is visiting town next week. Might grab lunch with her." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Her. Yeah, Lenora. I think I've mentioned her before. We were in the same program. He said it so easily, so carelessly, like it was nothing, like the name didn't mean anything. But I felt my heart start to race. This was it. This was her, the woman in the photograph, and he was about to see her. "I don't think you've mentioned her," I said, keeping my voice light, curious but not suspicious. "What's she doing in town?" Franklin shrugged, still not looking up from his phone. "Moved back recently, I think. Something about a job opportunity. We haven't caught up in years." Years. The word hung in the air between us. How many years? And why was he bringing it up now, so casually? Like it was just another lunch meeting with just another old friend. Unless it wasn't casual at all. Unless he was testing me, seeing if I'd react, if I'd give him permission to reconnect with someone who clearly had meant something to him once. "That's nice," I said. "Hope you two have a good time." He finally looked up then, and for just a second, I saw something flicker across his face. Relief, maybe, or disappointment that I wasn't going to make it complicated. He smiled. "Thanks, babe. It'll probably be boring, just catching up on old times." But it wasn't boring, and it wasn't just catching up. The second week, Franklin started paying more attention to his appearance. New cologne appeared on the bathroom counter, something expensive and woody that wasn't like anything he'd worn before. He started going to the gym more frequently, leaving early in the morning before I was even awake. He bought new shirts, got a haircut, started checking his reflection in every mirror he passed, and through it all, he was distracted, somewhere else mentally, even when he was sitting right next to me on the couch. I didn't say anything. I just watched, and I started documenting. I kept a journal, nothing fancy, just a small notebook I hid in the back of my closet. I wrote down dates, times, behaviors. The night he claimed he was working late, but I could hear music and conversation in the background when he called. The afternoon I drove past the restaurant where he said he was having that lunch with Lenora, and saw them through the window, saw the way he was leaning across the table toward her, saw the way she touched his hand, and he didn't pull away. The text notification that lit up his phone at 2 in the morning one night, and the way he grabbed it so quickly, so protectively, like it was something precious he needed to guard. I was methodical, clinical. Every instinct I had was screaming that my marriage was falling apart, but I refused to react emotionally. Not yet. Not until I understood the full picture. Because if I was going to confront this, if I was going to fight for my marriage or end it, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. The third week, Lenora's presence became more tangible, more real. Franklin's phone rang one evening while he was in the shower, and her name flashed on the screen. Just Lenora. No last name, like she was important enough to not need one. I didn't answer it. I just stood there, watching it ring, feeling this cold fury building in my chest. She was calling my husband at 8 o'clock at night. She was calling him at home, and he'd saved her number, which meant this wasn't just a one-time lunch with an old friend. This was ongoing. This was something. Franklin came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, saw his phone face down on the counter where I'd left it, and picked it up immediately. He checked the missed call. His jaw tightened. Then he smiled at me, that easy, charming smile that used to make me feel lucky. "Work stuff," he said. "I'll call them back later." But he didn't say work. He said them. Not her, not Lenora. He lied right to my face. The fourth week, Franklin announced he had a business conference, out of state, 3 days, some important clients he needed to meet with. He packed carefully, took his nice suits, packed cologne and the expensive watch I'd bought him for his last birthday, and I smiled and kissed him goodbye and wished him well. Then I checked our credit card statements. There was no conference, no hotel booked through his company, no plane ticket that matched the dates he'd given me, but there was a hotel room, booked under his name, in a city just 2 hours away, for 2 nights. I could have confronted him then, could have called him, demanded answers, forced this whole thing into the open, but something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was strategy. Or maybe it was that I needed to see just how far this had gone, needed to understand exactly who I'd been married to all these years before I decided what to do about it. So I let him go. I stayed home. I waited. And then came last Tuesday. I told Franklin I was going to visit my sister for the afternoon, something I did occasionally. Nothing unusual. He'd seemed relieved when I mentioned it, actually encouraging me to take my time, to stay for dinner if I wanted. Now I understand why. He'd been planning something. They'd been planning something. I got to my sister's house, stayed for about an hour, then told her I wasn't feeling well, needed to head home. It wasn't entirely a lie. My stomach was in knots, this horrible churning anxiety that something was about to break wide open. I drove home taking the long way, giving myself time to think, to prepare for whatever I was going to walk into. When I pulled into my driveway, there was another car parked there, a silver sedan I didn't recognize. For a moment, I just sat in my car, staring at that unfamiliar vehicle sitting in my space, in front of my house, like it belonged there. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles had gone white. I could have turned around, could have driven away, given myself more time, avoided whatever was waiting inside. But I'd spent 10 years avoiding. 10 years ignoring signs and swallowing doubts and choosing to believe in something that maybe never existed. So I got out of my car. I walked up to my own front door. I took a breath, and I went inside. The scene that greeted me will be burned into my memory forever. My living room. The space I decorated carefully, chosen every piece of furniture, arranged every photo frame and throw pillow, and sitting on my couch, legs tucked under her like she was completely comfortable, completely at ease, was a woman I'd only seen in one faded photograph, Lenora. She was beautiful in a casual, effortless way, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, Franklin's old college sweatshirt, actually, the one he'd told me he'd lost years ago. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she was holding a coffee mug, my coffee mug, the blue one I used every morning. And standing next to her, too close, way too close, was Franklin. They both froze when they saw me, complete, total freeze, like someone had hit pause on a movie. Franklin's face went through about 5 different expressions in the span of 2 seconds: shock, panic, guilt. And then this attempt at casual normalcy that was so transparent it would have been funny if it wasn't destroying my entire world. "Darla," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on my name. "You're home early." "Not," I can explain. "Not, this isn't what it looks like. Just, you're home early, like I was the problem, like I was the one who'd interrupted something I shouldn't have." Lenora set down the coffee mug carefully, deliberately, and turned to look at me with this expression that was almost curious, like she was studying me, trying to figure out what kind of woman would marry a man like Franklin. There was no shame in her face, no embarrassment, just this calm, assessing gaze that made me feel like an intruder in my own home. Every instinct I had was screaming. Part of me wanted to scream at them, to demand answers. To throw Lenora out and throw Franklin out after her and burn everything down right then and there. Part of me wanted to cry, to collapse, to finally let out all the hurt and betrayal and confusion that had been building for months. And part of me, the part that had been documenting and planning and preparing, knew that this was the moment I needed to play perfectly. So I smiled and closed the door behind me and set my purse down on the entry table. I smiled and walked into my living room like nothing was wrong, like finding another woman in my husband's sweatshirt drinking my coffee was perfectly normal. I smiled because I knew something they didn't know. I had evidence, I had documentation. I had been preparing for this moment, and I wasn't going to waste it on an emotional outburst that would give them the upper hand. "You must be Lenora," I said, my voice steady, pleasant even. "Franklin's mentioned you. It's nice to finally meet you." She blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Franklin looked like he might actually pass out. "I'll make some tea," I continued, moving toward the kitchen. "We should all sit down and chat." I didn't wait for them to respond. I walked into my kitchen, filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and let my hands shake where they couldn't see them. Behind me, I could hear them whispering urgently, frantic, hushed voices trying to figure out what to do, how to explain, what story to tell. And I just kept preparing tea, methodically, mechanically, buying myself time to think. The kettle started to whistle. I poured the water. I arranged cups on a tray. I added honey and lemon. And I thought about that wedding toast, 10 years ago, when Franklin had said he was dedicating a dance to the woman he'd loved for 10 years. I thought he meant me. I thought I was that woman. But standing in my kitchen, listening to him whisper frantically with the woman wearing his sweatshirt in my living room, I finally understood. He'd never been talking about me. Even on our wedding day, even in that moment that was supposed to be about us, about our future together, he'd been thinking about someone else, about her, about Lenora, the woman he'd loved for 10 years, the woman he apparently never stopped loving. I'd been a placeholder, a safe choice, a backup plan. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that somewhere deep down, I'd always known. I'd felt it in that fractured moment during the toast, in the way his eyes had gone distant and unfocused. I'd known, and I'd chosen to ignore it, chosen to believe that I could make him love me the way he loved her if I was just patient enough, loyal enough, perfect enough. But you can't make someone choose you. You can't love someone into loving you back. I picked up the tea tray and carried it back into the living room. Franklin and Lenora had arranged themselves more carefully now, sitting farther apart on the couch, trying to look innocent, like old friends just catching up. But the damage was done. The illusion was shattered, and I was done pretending. I set the tray down on the coffee table. I poured 3 cups of tea. I handed one to Lenora, one to Franklin, and kept one for myself. Then I sat down in the armchair across from them, crossed my legs, and took a sip. "So," I said, looking directly at Lenora, "how long have you two been sleeping together?" The question hung in the air like smoke, direct, unambiguous, no room for deflection or casual explanation. Franklin started to sputter, started to deny, but Lenora just looked at me with this almost respectful expression, like she appreciated the directness. She didn't answer the question, but she didn't need to. The answer was written all over both their faces. "It's not what you think," Franklin finally managed to say, which might be the most useless sentence in the history of cheating spouses. "Then tell me what it is," I said calmly. "Help me understand what I'm thinking wrong." He couldn't. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Lenora like she might save him, but she just sat there sipping tea, watching this unfold like she was curious to see where it would go. That was the moment I realized something crucial. Lenora wasn't some innocent party who'd been swept up in Franklin's lies. She knew exactly what she was doing. She'd known he was married. She'd come here anyway. She'd put on his sweatshirt and sat on his wife's couch and drunk from his wife's mug, and she'd done it all without a trace of guilt because she didn't see me as a person. I was just an obstacle, something in the way of what she wanted, and what she wanted was my husband. Well, she could have him, but not the way she thought. I stood up, set my teacup down gently, and looked at Franklin. Really looked at him, maybe for the first time in years. He looked small suddenly, diminished, nothing like the confident, charming man I'd married. He looked scared. "I think you both should leave," I said quietly. "Darla, please. We need to talk about this," Franklin started. "No," I interrupted, my voice still calm, still steady. "We really don't. Not right now. Not like this. I need you to leave, Franklin. Take her with you. Go wherever you've been going, and give me some space to think." He looked like he might argue, might try to explain or defend or somehow make this better, but something in my face must have told him it was pointless. He stood up. Lenora stood up beside him, and she had the audacity to smile at me, this small, secretive smile like she'd won something. I didn't react. I just stood there, waiting for them to leave my house. They did. The door closed behind them, and I was alone. I stood in my living room for a long time after they left, just breathing, just existing in the wreckage of my marriage. And the coffee mug Lenora had used was still sitting on my table. Franklin's jacket was still hanging on the coat rack by the door. Evidence of their presence was everywhere, contaminating my space, my home, my life. And that's when I allowed myself to feel it. The rage, the grief, the absolute soul-crushing betrayal of realizing that the man I'd trusted, the man I'd built a life with, had been living a double life for God knows how long. That every time he'd told me he loved me, he'd been thinking of someone else. That I'd wasted years, years of my life on someone who'd never actually chosen me. But here's what they didn't know. Here's what I'd been preparing for, what I'd been building toward for 3 months. I walked into my home office, opened my laptop, and pulled up the folder I'd been carefully curating. Bank statements showing irregular transactions, credit card receipts from hotels and restaurants, text message backups I'd recovered from our shared cloud account, photographs, dates, times, patterns, 3 months of documentation, 3 months of evidence, 3 months of proving to myself that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts had been right all along, and I'd already done more than just collect evidence. I'd consulted a lawyer, a good one. I'd learned about asset protection and spousal support, and the infidelity clause in our prenup that Franklin had insisted on, ironically, to protect his assets if I ever cheated on him. I'd moved money, secured accounts, prepared for the legal battle that was coming. They thought I was clueless. They thought I'd just discovered their affair. They thought they had time to figure out their story, to manipulate the situation, to make me look like the irrational, jealous wife. But I'd been 3 steps ahead the entire time. That night, sitting in my home office surrounded by evidence of my husband's betrayal, I made a decision. This wasn't just about confronting an affair. This wasn't just about getting a divorce and moving on. This was about making sure that Franklin understood exactly what he'd thrown away, exactly what he'd destroyed. This was about making sure Lenora understood that she hadn't won anything worth having. This was about closing a trap that had been years in the making. Even if I hadn't fully realized, I was building it until now. Franklin called that night. I didn't answer. He called again. I didn't answer. He texted long rambling messages full of apologies and excuses and promises to explain everything. I read every single one. I saved every single one, and I didn't respond because I was done reacting. I was done being the patient, understanding wife who smoothed things over and gave people the benefit of the doubt. I was done sacrificing my dignity for someone who'd never valued it in the first place. For the first time in 10 years, I was going to put myself first, and Franklin and Lenora were about to learn exactly what that meant. The next morning, I installed a tracking app on Franklin's phone while he was in the shower. You need to understand something about betrayal. It doesn't just break your heart, it transforms you. It takes the person you were, the one who believed in trust and honesty and the fundamental goodness of people, and it burns that person away until something harder, something colder, something infinitely more dangerous emerges from the ashes. That's what was happening to me. And Franklin had no idea. I'd spent the entire night not sleeping, sitting in my home office with that folder of evidence spread across my desk like crime scene photographs, and I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Franklin emotionally. I wasn't going to beg or plead or try to understand why he'd done this to me, to us, to everything we'd built together. No. I was going to dismantle his entire life systematically, methodically, piece by careful piece, until he understood exactly what he'd destroyed. But first, I needed to know everything. The tracking app was surprisingly easy to install. It took maybe 3 minutes. I'd researched it weeks ago, after I'd seen him with Lenora through that restaurant window. After I'd realized that my husband's words and his actions were telling 2 completely different stories. The app would show me everywhere he went, every place he stopped, how long he stayed there. It would give me a map of his lies. And Franklin, God. Franklin was so confident in his deception, so sure I was the clueless, faithful wife who'd never question him, that he didn't even have a passcode on his phone anymore. That's how little he respected me, how thoroughly he'd underestimated me. He came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, hair still wet, and I was sitting on our bed scrolling through my own phone like nothing had changed, like I hadn't just gained the ability to track his every movement. He kissed the top of my head, actually kissed me, and said, "I need to run some errands today. Might be gone for a few hours." "Okay," I said, not looking up. "I'll probably work on some things around the house." He got dressed. He left. And the moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I opened the tracking app and watched the little blue dot that represented my husband drive straight to Lenora's apartment. He stayed there for 4 hours. 4 hours in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon, when he was supposed to be running errands, when he thought I was at home reorganizing closets or whatever he imagined I did with my time. 4 hours with the woman who'd been sitting on my couch in his sweatshirt. 4 hours building their little fantasy, while I sat in our house tracking his location and documenting every minute of it. But here's what they didn't know, what neither of them could have anticipated. I wasn't just collecting evidence anymore. I was studying them, learning their patterns, understanding the rhythm of their affair so I could predict their next moves before they made them. Because if I was going to destroy this, I needed to be surgical, precise. I needed to hit them where it would hurt most, and to do that I needed to understand exactly what they thought they had. So I became a ghost in my own marriage, present, but not really there. I smiled when Franklin came home. I made dinner. I asked about his day and nodded at his lies and acted like everything was normal. And every single day I learned more. I learned that Franklin was going to Lenora's apartment 3, sometimes 4 times a week. I learned that he was spending hundreds of dollars at restaurants, buying jewelry that never came home to me, booking hotel rooms for weekend getaways he claimed were business trips. I learned that he'd opened a separate bank account, one I wasn't supposed to know about, and he was funneling money into it, small amounts at first, then larger ones, like he was building an escape fund. He was planning to leave me. The question wasn't if, it was when. But I learned something else too, something that would become crucial later. I learned that Lenora wasn't the devastated ex-girlfriend pining away for her lost love. She was active on dating apps, multiple dating apps. Even while she was sleeping with my husband, even while she was helping him plan his exit from our marriage, she was messaging other men, going on other dates, keeping her options open. Franklin wasn't her great love story. He was her current project. And when I discovered that, when I found her profiles and read her messages and saw the pattern of how she operated, something crystallized inside me. A plan, not just for revenge, but for liberation. For both of us, ironically. Because Franklin thought he was choosing Lenora, thought he was finally going to be with the woman he'd loved for 10 years. But the truth, the absolute devastating truth that I could see and he couldn't, was that Lenora was already looking for her next target. She was going to break his heart exactly the way he was breaking mine, and I was going to make sure he couldn't run back to me when it happened. 2 weeks after I'd kicked them out of my house, Franklin came home one evening with flowers, roses, the expensive kind from the florist downtown, not the grocery store bouquet kind. He looked nervous, which was unusual for him. Franklin was always confident, always charming, always able to talk his way through any situation. But standing in our kitchen holding those roses, he looked young suddenly, vulnerable, like a man who'd realized he might be losing something important. "Can we talk?" he asked. I was making tea, my back to him, giving myself time to arrange my face into the right expression, curious but not angry, open but not desperate. I turned around and leaned against the counter. "Of course." He set the flowers down and ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd seen 1,000 times over the years. "I know things have been weird since last week, and I want to explain. I need you to understand what happened with Lenora. It's not what you think." There it was again, that phrase, "it's not what you think." Like I was the one misunderstanding the situation. Like walking into my house and finding another woman in his clothes wasn't exactly what it looked like. "Okay," I said simply. "Explain." And he did. Oh God, he really did. He told me about how Lenora had been his first real love, how they'd dated in college, and he'd thought they'd get married, but then she'd wanted to move to California for her career, and he'd wanted to stay on the East Coast, and they'd broken up. How he'd spent years wondering what if, wondering if he'd made the right choice, wondering if he'd let the love of his life slip away. How when we met, I'd seemed perfect, stable, the kind of woman you build a life with. But there'd always been this part of him that wondered about Lenora. He told me all of this, standing in our kitchen, looking at me with actual tears in his eyes. And then he said, "But seeing her again, spending time with her, I realized something. She's not who I remembered. We're not who we were. And I almost destroyed everything I have with you chasing a memory." Do you know what's fascinating about liars? They tell you the truth they think you want to hear wrapped up in just enough honesty to make it believable. Franklin was telling me that Lenora wasn't what he remembered, which was probably true. But he wasn't telling me that he'd been sleeping with her for 6 months. He wasn't telling me about the hotel rooms and the jewelry and the separate bank account. He was giving me a sanitized version of his betrayal, one where he could play the confused husband who almost made a mistake but came to his senses just in time. He wanted forgiveness without consequences. He wanted to reset the marriage without actually dealing with what he'd done to it. And the old me, the Darla from 6 months ago, might have given it to him, might have been so desperate to save the marriage, so committed to loyalty and patience and making things work, that I would have swallowed my hurt and accepted his half-truth confession and tried to rebuild. But that Darla was gone. "Thank you for telling me," I said, and I watched relief flood his face. He actually thought I was going to forgive him. "I need some time to process all of this." "Of course," he said quickly. "Take all the time you need. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, Darla. Whatever you need." What I needed was for him to keep thinking he'd gotten away with it. What I needed was for him to believe that his little confession had worked, that I was going to be the understanding wife who forgave and forgot. Because while he was relaxing, while he was thinking the crisis had passed, I was going to finish building my case. That night, Franklin reached for me in bed. Actually reached for me, like the conversation in the kitchen had fixed something, like we could just go back to normal. And I let him. I know how that sounds. I know some of you are probably judging me right now, wondering how I could sleep with a man I knew was betraying me. But I needed him to think everything was okay. I needed him off guard. And honestly, a part of me wanted to see if I could feel anything, if there was any fragment of love or desire or connection left between us. There wasn't. It was mechanical, empty, like going through the motions of something that used to mean something. And when it was over and he fell asleep next to me, satisfied and content and believing he'd successfully manipulated me, I lay there in the dark and felt absolutely nothing. That's when I knew for certain. This marriage was over. Not because of what he'd done, but because of what I'd become. I couldn't go back to being the woman who loved him. That woman had died the moment I found that photograph in his briefcase. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in deception. Mine, not his. Franklin thought we were reconciling. He was attentive, affectionate, brought home flowers twice more, planned date nights, acted like a husband who was trying to save his marriage. And I played along. I smiled. I laughed at his jokes. I went on the date nights and held his hand and acted like I was healing, like I was choosing to trust him again. Meanwhile, I was meeting with my lawyer every few days, always when Franklin thought I was at the grocery store or having lunch with friends. Her name was Patricia, and she was exactly what I needed: sharp, strategic, and completely unsentimental about divorce. She didn't try to talk me into counseling or suggest we work things out. She just listened to everything I'd documented, reviewed all my evidence, and started building a case that would protect everything I'd worked for. "The infidelity clause in your prenup is ironclad," she told me during one meeting. "If you can prove he cheated, he forfeits his claim to your inheritance, your premarital assets, and the house. He'd walk away with only what he earned during the marriage, minus whatever the court awards you in spousal support." "I can prove it," I said, and I showed her everything: the tracking data, the hotel receipts, the text messages I'd recovered from our shared cloud account, the photographs a private investigator had taken of Franklin and Lenora together, images that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Patricia smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who knew they were about to win. "He's going to be blindsided," she said. "Good." But I still wasn't ready to move. Not yet. Because I needed one more thing. I needed Franklin to think he was safe enough to make his next move. I needed him to show his hand completely. And I knew from the tracking app that he was still seeing Lenora, still going to her apartment, still building whatever fantasy they thought they were creating. He'd just gotten better at hiding it, or so he thought. Then came our anniversary, 10 years, a decade of marriage. Franklin suggested we go to La Bella Vista, the same restaurant where we'd had our rehearsal dinner all those years ago. He made a reservation, told me to dress up, said he wanted to celebrate properly, show me how committed he was to making things right. I wore the black dress he'd always loved, the one that made me feel powerful and beautiful. I did my hair and makeup carefully. I put on the diamond earrings he'd given me for our 5th anniversary, back when I still believed those gifts meant something. And I looked at myself in the mirror before we left and thought, This is the last time I play this role. After tonight, everything changes. The restaurant was beautiful, candlelit and elegant, exactly the kind of place where important moments happen. We ordered wine. We talked about nothing important, surface conversation that felt increasingly surreal. And then, right after our entrees arrived, I set down my fork and looked directly at Franklin. "Do you remember what you said at our wedding?" I asked. "The toast you made?" His face did something complicated. Surprise, maybe some guilt, definitely caution. Of course. I said the dance was for the woman I'd loved for 10 years. "Who were you talking about?" The question hung between us like smoke. Franklin opened his mouth, closed it, tried to figure out what the right answer was. And in that hesitation, in that moment where he tried to calculate what would hurt me least or protect him most, I had my confirmation. "You," he finally said. "I was talking about you." "Liar." The word came out soft, almost gentle, but it hit him like a slap. His face went pale. "You were thinking about Lenora," I continued, my voice still calm, still steady. "Even on our wedding day, you were thinking about her. The woman you loved for 10 years wasn't me. It was never me. I was just the safe choice you made when you couldn't have her." "Darla, that's not—" "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't lie to me anymore. I'm so tired of the lies, Franklin. I know everything. I've known for months. I know about the hotel rooms and the separate bank account and the fact that you're still seeing her even after your little confession in the kitchen. I know you're planning to leave me. I know you think you're finally going to be with your great love." He looked like he might be sick. His hands were shaking. "How long have you known?" "Does it matter?" I asked. "The point is, I know, and I've been documenting everything, every lie, every betrayal, every time you chose her over me. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to finish my dinner. Then I'm going to stand up and walk out of this restaurant, and you're never going to see me play this role again. Darla, please, we can fix this." "No," I said firmly. "We can't, because there's nothing left to fix. You destroyed this marriage the moment you decided I wasn't enough. The moment you decided your memory of a college girlfriend was more important than the vows you made to me. The moment you brought her into my house and let her sit on my couch in your clothes like she belonged there." I stood up. I picked up my purse, and I looked down at my husband, this man I'd spent 10 years loving, and felt absolutely nothing but relief that I was finally walking away. "One more thing," I said. "You should know that Lenora isn't who you think she is either, but you'll figure that out soon enough." I walked out of that restaurant with my head high and my hands steady, and I didn't look back, not once. And as I drove home alone on what should have been a romantic anniversary dinner, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Actual, genuine freedom from the weight of trying to make someone love me, from the exhausting work of being enough for a man who would never truly choose me. But the story doesn't end there. Because Franklin, desperate and panicking, and realizing he was about to lose everything, made a choice that night. He went straight to Lenora's apartment. I know because I was still tracking his phone, and he stayed there until morning. The next day I came home from a meeting with Patricia to find Franklin's car in the driveway, except Franklin wasn't in the car, and when I walked into my house, I found Lenora in my bedroom. Not just in my bedroom, but actively packing Franklin's belongings into suitcases, going through his drawers, his closet, taking his things like she had every right to be there. She looked up when I walked in, and there was no guilt in her expression, no embarrassment, just this calm, almost triumphant certainty. She thought she'd won. "He asked me to help him pack," she said simply. "He's moving in with me." And there it was, the final move, the moment Franklin had finally made his choice, or thought he had. He was leaving me for Lenora, walking away from our marriage for the woman he'd supposedly loved for 10 years. Do you know what I did? I pulled out my phone. I opened the folder of screenshots I'd been saving. Screenshots of Lenora's dating profiles, Screenshots of her messages to other men, messages sent just days ago, messages that made it very clear she was keeping her options open, that Franklin was just one possibility among many. And I showed them to her. "Does he know about Marcus?" I asked casually. "The lawyer you've been messaging? Or David? The doctor? Or, oh, this is my favorite, Connor, who you told just last week that you were single and looking for something serious?" Her face went through several expressions very quickly. Shock, fear, and then something ugly, something defensive and cornered. "You've been stalking me?" "No," I said calmly. "I've been protecting myself. There's a difference. See, I needed to understand who you really were before I let Franklin throw away his life for you. And what I discovered is that you're not the great tragic love of his life. You're a woman who likes the thrill of taking things that belong to other people. You enjoy the chase, the conquest, the drama. But you get bored easily, don't you? And when you get bored, you move on to the next man, the next challenge, the next married husband you can convince to leave his wife. Franklin loves me," she said, but her voice had lost its certainty. "Maybe," I agreed, "but you don't love him. You love the idea of him. You love winning. And in about 6 months, maybe a year if he's lucky, you're going to get bored and move on, and he's going to realize that he destroyed his entire life for someone who never really wanted him in the first place." I walked over to where she was standing and took the suitcase from her hands. "Get out of my house, Lenora. Take Franklin with you. Build your little fantasy. But know that I'm about to make sure that when it falls apart, and it will fall apart, he won't have anything left to fall back on." She left. She actually left, walking out of my house with her face pale and her confidence shaken, and I knew she was going to tell Franklin everything I'd said, knew she was going to try to spin it, make me look like the crazy, jealous wife, but it didn't matter, because I had one final move to make. That evening, Franklin came home. He walked in expecting confrontation, expecting drama, expecting me to beg him to stay. Instead, he found me sitting calmly in the living room with divorce papers spread out on the coffee table. "Sign them," I said simply. And that's when I told him everything, everything I knew, everything I'd documented, every lie he'd told and every time I'd caught him in it. I told him about the tracking app and the private investigator and the months of evidence I'd been collecting. I told him about the infidelity clause in our prenup and what it meant for his financial future. I told him about Lenora's dating profiles and her pattern of pursuing married men, and the fact that she was still messaging other guys, even while helping him pack his things. I watched 10 years of confidence and entitlement crumble in real time. "You can't do this," he said, but his voice was hollow. "I already have," and I replied. "Sign the papers, Franklin. Leave quietly. Or I make all of this public. Every text message, every hotel receipt, every lie you told. I'll make sure everyone we know, everyone you work with, understands exactly who you really are." He signed the papers that night. With shaking hands and tears in his eyes, he signed away our marriage. And then he left. Walking out of the house we'd shared for 10 years, with just 2 suitcases, and the crushing realization that he'd gambled everything on a woman who was already looking for someone else. But here's what I didn't tell you yet. The part of this story that changes everything you think you know about revenge and justice and what it really means to reclaim your life. Because 3 weeks after Franklin signed those divorce papers, after he moved in with Lenora and I started the process of actually rebuilding my existence, something happened that I never could have predicted. Franklin called me. It was 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and I was sitting in my newly redecorated living room, the one where Lenora had sat so confidently in Franklin's sweatshirt, except now it looked completely different. New furniture, new paint, new energy. I'd spent 3 weeks erasing every trace of the life I'd shared with Franklin, and honestly, it felt incredible, like shedding skin, like becoming someone new. When his name lit up my phone, my first instinct was to ignore it. I'd blocked him on everything else, email, social media, messaging apps, but I'd kept his number unblocked for legal reasons in case the lawyers needed to communicate something urgent. I stared at that screen, watching it ring, and part of me wanted to answer just to hear what possible excuse or explanation or manipulation he could offer now, but I didn't. I let it go to voicemail. Then he called again, and again, 6 times in 20 minutes. So I answered, not because I cared what he had to say, but because 6 desperate calls at 11 at night meant something had broken, and I needed to know what it was. "What do you want, Franklin?" His voice when he spoke was something I'd never heard before. Broken. Actually broken. "You were right. About everything. About Lenora. About all of it." I should have felt triumphant. Should have felt vindicated. Should have savored this moment of him admitting that I'd been right and he'd destroyed everything for nothing. But instead, I just felt tired. "What happened?" "She's gone," he said, and I could hear him crying. Franklin, who never cried, who prided himself on being controlled and composed, was sobbing on the phone. "I came home tonight and all her stuff was gone. She left a note saying she'd met someone else, someone with better prospects, and that she was sorry, but this was never meant to be permanent. Darla, I gave up everything. I lost you. I lost the house. I destroyed my reputation at work because people found out about the affair, and she just left like I was nothing." And there it was. The moment I'd predicted months ago. Lenora had gotten bored, found her next target, and moved on. Franklin had gambled his entire life on a woman who'd never actually wanted him for more than the thrill of taking him away from someone else. Do you know what the strangest part was? I didn't feel happy. I thought I would. I thought hearing about his devastation would feel like justice, like cosmic balance finally being restored. But instead, I just felt empty, because his pain didn't undo mine. His suffering didn't heal the 10 years I'd wasted on a marriage built on lies. It just meant we were both broken now instead of just me. "I'm sorry that happened to you," I said, and I meant it. Not sorry enough to take him back, not sorry enough to offer comfort or forgiveness, just genuinely sorry that another human being was experiencing the same pain he'd inflicted on me. "Can we talk?" he asked. "In person? I need to explain some things. I need you to understand." "No," I said firmly. "We're done, Franklin. Whatever you need to process, whatever you need to understand, you have to do that on your own. I'm not your wife anymore. I'm not your therapist. I'm not your friend. I'm just someone you used to know. Please," he begged, and the desperation in his voice was almost painful to hear. "I made a mistake, the biggest mistake of my life. I threw away a real partnership for a fantasy. Can't we just talk about it?" And that's when I realized something crucial. Franklin didn't actually want me back. He wanted the safety net back. He wanted the comfortable life we'd built, the woman who'd always been there to support him and believe in him and smooth over his mistakes. He wanted to not be alone with the consequences of his choices. But he didn't want me, Darla, the actual person with feelings and needs and a life that didn't revolve around him. "Goodbye, Franklin," I said, and I hung up. He tried calling back. I blocked his number, and that was the last time I spoke to my ex-husband. But the story doesn't end there, because 2 months later I got a message from Lenora. Not a call this time, just a short email that appeared in my inbox like a ghost from a life I'd already moved past. The subject line was simple: "I'm sorry." I almost deleted it without reading. Almost. But curiosity got the better of me, so I opened it. The email was surprisingly brief. She wrote that she'd been doing some thinking, some real self-reflection, and she'd realized that she had a pattern of pursuing unavailable men, of getting a rush from being wanted by people who were supposed to be committed to someone else. She wrote that she'd hurt a lot of people with that pattern, including me, including Franklin, including herself. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't making excuses. She was just acknowledging that she'd been part of something destructive, and she was sorry. I read that email 3 times, and then I did something I never expected to do. I wrote back. "Thank you for the apology," I typed. "I don't know if it changes anything, but I appreciate the honesty. I hope you figure out whatever it is you're actually looking for, because I don't think it's married men. I think it's something deeper that you're trying to avoid by chasing people you can't actually have. She responded an hour later. You're probably right. For what it's worth, Franklin really did love you. He was just too stupid to realize it until he'd already destroyed it. I was just the excuse he used to avoid dealing with his own issues. And that was it. That was our entire exchange. Two women who'd been on opposite sides of a betrayal, acknowledging that we'd both been players in a game that nobody actually won. I never responded to that second email. There was nothing left to say. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Franklin at a coffee shop. Not on purpose, just one of those random encounters that happens when you live in the same city and frequent the same places. He was sitting alone at a table by the window, looking at his laptop, and he looked older somehow, tired, like the weight of his choices had settled into his bones. He saw me at the same moment I saw him. Our eyes met, and for a second, neither of us moved. Then he stood up, and I could see him trying to figure out what to do, what to say, how to navigate this unexpected moment. I could have left, could have walked out before he reached me, but something made me stay. Darla, he said, when he got to where I was standing. Hi. Hi, Franklin. Silence. Awkward, heavy silence, filled with 10 years of history and 6 months of absence. How are you? He finally asked. I'm good, I said, and I realized it was true. I was good, actually good, not just pretending for the sake of appearances. How about you? He laughed, but it was a bitter sound. I'm managing, moved into a smaller place. Therapy twice a week, trying to figure out who I am when I'm not running from myself. That sounds healthy, I said, and I meant it. I'm really sorry, Sha'odim, he said suddenly, for everything, for the lies, for the betrayal, for wasting your time, for making you feel like you weren't enough when the truth is I was never enough for you. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. And there it was, the apology I'd wanted 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even 6 months ago. The acknowledgement that he'd been wrong, that I hadn't been crazy or paranoid or unreasonable, that his choices had destroyed something real. But standing there in that coffee shop, hearing those words, I realized something profound. I didn't need his apology anymore. I didn't need his validation or his acknowledgement or his understanding. I'd already moved on. I'd already rebuilt. I'd already become someone who didn't define herself by his choices or his opinion or his love. Thank you for saying that, I told him. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I hope you find happiness, he said. Real happiness. The kind I never gave you. I already have, I said. And I walked out of that coffee shop feeling lighter than I had in years. Because here's the thing about revenge, about justice, about all those plans I'd made to destroy Franklin's life the way he'd destroyed mine. In the end, none of it mattered. The tracking apps and the evidence and the strategic divorce didn't heal me. They protected me legally, sure. They ensured I didn't lose everything in the dissolution of our marriage. But they didn't make me whole again. What made me whole was the decision to stop defining myself by his betrayal, to stop letting his choices control my emotional state, to stop waiting for him to suffer enough to balance the scales. Because there is no enough. There's no amount of his pain that would undo mine. There's no cosmic justice that makes betrayal fair. There's just the choice to move forward or stay stuck, and I chose to move forward. Today, almost a year after I walked into my house and found Lenora sitting on my couch, I'm living a completely different life. I took the settlement money and started the small business I'd always dreamed about, but never had the courage to pursue. I reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with over the years, friends who reminded me who I was before I became Franklin's wife. I redecorated every room in my house until it felt like mine, instead of ours. I started therapy and worked through the patterns that had made me stay in a marriage where I was undervalued for so long, and I started dating again. Nothing serious yet, just coffee dates and dinner conversations and the slow process of learning to trust again, learning to recognize red flags, learning to value myself enough to walk away the moment someone shows me they're not capable of being honest or faithful or present. I'm not going to tell you that revenge didn't feel good In the moment, it did. Watching Franklin realize he'd destroyed everything for nothing. Watching him sign those divorce papers with shaking hands, knowing that I'd been 10 steps ahead the entire time, all of that felt like power, like control, like justice. But the real revenge, the kind that actually matters, wasn't the divorce or the evidence or the strategic takedown. The real revenge was building a life so good, so fulfilling, so genuinely mine that I stopped thinking about him at all. The real revenge was waking up one morning and realizing I'd gone an entire week without remembering what he'd done to me. The real revenge was becoming someone who'd never accept being second choice ever again. So here's what I want you to take away from my story. When someone betrays you, when they choose someone else, when they make you feel like you're not enough, your first instinct might be to hurt them back, to make them suffer the way they made you suffer. And I'm not going to tell you that instinct is wrong. It's human. It's natural. It's the way our brains try to restore balance to an unfair situation. But the truth is, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's reconstruction. It's taking all that energy you might spend plotting someone else's downfall and investing it in your own rise. It's choosing yourself so completely, so unapologetically, that the person who betrayed you becomes irrelevant, not because you've forgiven them, but because you've moved so far beyond them that they can't touch you anymore. Franklin destroyed our marriage, but I refused to let him destroy me. And in the end, that's the victory that actually mattered. So if you're watching this and you're going through something similar, if you're dealing with betrayal or lies, or the devastating realization that the person you trusted has been choosing someone else, I want you to hear this. You have a choice right now. You can spend your energy on revenge, on making them pay, on ensuring they suffer as much as you have. Or you can take that same energy and build something beautiful out of the wreckage. Both are valid. Both are understandable. But only one will actually set you free. I chose freedom, and I've never looked back. Now I want to hear from you because I know I'm not the only one who's lived through something like this. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's betrayal forced you to choose between revenge and rebuilding? What did you choose? And looking back, do you think you made the right decision? Drop your story in the comments below. Don't hold back. This is a safe space for real talk about the messy, complicated reality of relationships and heartbreak, and finding yourself again after someone's tried to break you. And if this story resonated with you, if it helped you feel less alone in whatever you're going through, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because I'm going to keep sharing stories like this, real stories about real people navigating the complicated mess of human relationships. Stories that don't have perfect endings but have honest ones. Stories that remind us we're all just trying to figure out how to survive the people we love. Thanks for listening to my story. I'll see you in the next one. Remember, the best revenge is becoming someone they could never destroy.